Hi, my name is Mike Gibb. I run accountsrecovery.net, and I'll be moderating today's webinar on negotiating tactics to help maximize recovery. Getting individuals to answer the phone or respond to a letter has never been harder, but once that phone is picked up or that call is placed, closing that call with a payment is proving to be just as difficult. We've got a panel of experienced executives from the credit and collections industry today who are here to share their tips and insights into how collection agencies and creditors can win more business. This webinar is being generously sponsored by TCN. You get the chance to hear about them a little later in our program. I want to take a quick minute and say a few words about accountsrecovery.net. Accountsrecovery.net is a news and information platform for the ARM industry. The site publishes unique and curated content, maintains a number of email newsletters, hosts webinars like this one, and offers a number of exciting podcasts for the ARM industry. The site is free for anyone in the industry to use and is a great resource of news and insights to help educate and inform. I hope you'll all spend a few minutes every day checking out what it has to offer. Now let me take a minute and tell you a little bit about today's speakers. Beth Conklin has more than 24 years of experience in the collection industry, starting out as a collector, team leader, and supervisor of collections before moving into the role as manager of training and regulatory compliance. Beth is currently an account executive with State Collection Services. Prior to that, she was director of training and development at McCarthy, Burgess, and Wolf. Beth has the TSP and CCCO designations, as well as is a certified instructor for ACA International. Beth has earned the Fred Kirchner Award in March 2013 and 2015, as well as being recognized as the ACA Certified Instructor of the Year for 2012 and 2016. Kelly Kruger is the Vice President of Organizational Development and Training for CBE Companies. Kelly has 22 years of experience in training and development and currently oversees all matters relating to employee development and engagement. Kelly's been with CBE on and off since 1996 and specializes in sales, persuasion, customer service, recovery, and management training. Her trainings focus on the development of human talent, utilizing the latest innovations in human performance technology. Roger Weiss is the Chief Operating Officer of CACI and also runs the Collections Coach. Roger's been involved in the collections industry since 1992 and is a frequent speaker at events and conferences. The format for today's webinar will be a panel discussion moderated by myself. We encourage everybody to submit questions and we'll get to them as the discussion is ongoing. To submit a question, please enter it into the question tab on your Zoom webinar control panel. This event is being recorded and a recording will be made available in the coming days on accountsrecovery.net. With that, let's launch into the discussion for today. Beth, let's start with a fairly easy question right off the top. What are some of your best tricks at helping teach collectors to be better negotiators?
Well, so some of my best tricks to help them be better negotiators. I guess I would divide this up into twofold. So I would divide this up as far as whether they're on the call with a patient or consumer versus on the call with a patient or consumer. And so I think some tricks that I help collectors to be better negotiators if they're not on the call with the patient or consumer would be role playing. You know, some common reasons for delinquency that they would hear on the phone, role playing those actual examples. Also listening to calls, doing call calibrations where, you know, we kind of sit in a room together and listen to calls that were previously recorded as far as negotiations, calibrating that call and discussing things that worked, things that did not work, things they could have said that may have turned the call around, or things that did work that may have been a difficult or challenging call that based off of the collector's techniques and styles, they were able to turn that call around into getting some dollars secured. The second piece of that would be while they're on the call, something that I implemented in my previous life as the Director of Training and Development were foot cards. And so we created a set of cards that were on color-coded construction paper. They were laminated, and they were on a key ring. And they had specific negotiation tools that were very subjective to the clients that they were working, as far as some common rebuttals they would be able to use while negotiating, as well as payment hierarchies and the things that they could say or do to help them turn that call around into payment.
I mean, I agree with Beth. There's definitely two different sides to teaching collectors how to be better negotiators. When I think about that question, I kind of think about it in a different way and just say, I start teaching our collectors how to be amazing communicators, because you can't be a good negotiator if you can't be a really great communicator. because that's what it's all about. Like, we try to script our collectors, or we don't, but if you try to script your collectors, they're going to sound like they're scripted instead of being a human being talking to another human being. And I know what I'm about ready to say will probably go against everything else you've been told in the past, but teaching our collectors how to put the consumer in control. People don't like to be told what to do. They want to control something. Their lives are a little bit out of control because they're maybe in debt in more than one area. And most of the time, the fight that you're having over the phone isn't over the money situation, it's over the control, and they want to have control. And I always say no one ever wins the game of tennis with the ball in your court. So knowing how to put the ball in the consumer's court is probably one of the biggest things I try to teach our collectors when teaching them negotiations.
Kelly, that's a powerful statement right there. I couldn't agree with you more. So oftentimes collectors feel like it has to be a power struggle when actually it needs to be an empowerment to the consumers. I try to advocate to get people better at communications and then persuasion ever before negotiation. And it's all in the nuance of how questions are asked. I advocate a verbal precision and vocal acuity. So pay attention to every word that you say and the manner in which you say every word that you say. I know I sound like a broken record when I repeat this time and again, but when you're on the phone with anyone, you lose all of the element of any physical communication. So you lose facial expression, posture, body movement. You can't tell if they're defensive or rolling their eyes or several other key factors in a successful communication. So what it breaks down to is how you use your voice, the intonation of your voice, and the words you say become that much more critical. In fact, it breaks down to 84% of the successful communication is your actual voice, with only 16% being the words you say. Does that mean that you don't need to pay attention to the words you say? Absolutely not. In fact, I would put out there that I think that makes the words that you say that much more critical. As an example, so many times, and we've all heard this, and I bet, Mike, if we could turn on all of the listeners' webcams, we would see everyone shaking their heads yes, because occasionally we see our best collectors saying something along the lines of, do you want to do a check over the phone today? And there's two possible answers to that, no and no. Why? Because they haven't rehearsed enough to get into the habit, the pattern, and the groove of saying the easiest way to take care of this today is with a check over the phone or a credit card, which is more convenient for you. So I agree, Kelly. We've got to put them in control. We've got to make them feel like they win by beating us. Is that fair?
Yes, I think that's totally fair. And, you know, you brought up a good point too, Roger, where you're talking about 86% is our word choices and our tone and what we're saying. And, you know, I think one thing that we need to be mindful of as well when we're negotiating and we're working with the patients or consumers is our tone and our voice is the only tool we really have as far as speaking with that consumer patient. So, you know, when you're sitting up straight, when you have good posture versus like right now, if I lean back, notice how my voice automatically changes because I'm leaning back and I'm kind of slouched over, versus when I'm sitting up, my voice totally has a different tone. It's more booming, and, you know, you got kind of more of a, I don't want to say authoritative, but a more confident tone that's coming through. So when you do have that type of approach with the patient or consumer, it's going to be a little bit more easier to negotiate and give those different choices, and they're going to hear you better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Beth, I think you nailed it right there when you talked about confidence. That's the other thing, that when we talk about negotiations, we really think about the talk off and how to better negotiate, but we also forget about what Roger talked about as your tone of voice, and what you talked about as confidence. Those are huge pieces in regards to teaching people how to be better negotiators. It's not about, you know, a call flow and a talk off. It's really about how do you sound and how confident do you sound when you do it. We do a lot of training in regards to confidence because honestly, if you don't if you don't believe in yourself, there's no way the consumer is going to give you their checking account information or their credit card information. They're not going to trust you.
And I think that brings up a valid point of something that we talked about before is, you know, if you're ending your sentences like this and you keep raising it up in octave, it sounds like you're questioning yourself and you're not sure of what you're even saying. Whereas when you're giving your talk off and you're giving options and you're just having a conversation with the patient or consumer and you're negotiating, and it's what I kind of call FNC, or full and complete information, right? So you're asking open-ended questions, you're talking to that person, just trying to find out the best way to get the account paid, the quickest way to satisfy both yourself, your client, as well as the patient or consumer. If you're ending those sentences down an octave, you sound more confident and you sound believable. Even if you're a brand new collector and you're nervous and you're shy and you're not sure what your tips and some cheat sheets and a little talk off scripted that's kind of helping you. But if you kind of end those sentences as a statement and lower your voice just an octave instead of going up like this, you're gonna sound confident, even if you may be a little bit uncertain of yourself, and that's gonna come through, and you're gonna get that buy-in and that trust from that patient or consumer.
Excellent. Well, a great start to today's discussion. At this point, I just want to pause briefly, and I'd like to invite McKay Berg from TCN to say a few words. McKay?
Hey, thanks, Mike. Really great to have the panelists, and as Mike has been so gracious to invite us. But I just wanted to share a little bit about what TCN does. But TCN is a provider of cloud-based call center technologies for enterprises, contact centers, as well as collection agencies worldwide. Our TCN has combined the deep understanding of the collectors and as well as the needs of those collectors and users of the technology with an affordable delivery model, and ensuring that they have this immediate access to a robust technology such as a predictive dialer or IVR. And that may play a lot into a lot of these negotiation skills, as well as maybe instilling the confidence into the agents that they have the technology to back, you know, a lot of the to back what they're saying and to give them that confidence. But we serve in various companies and enterprises in multiple industries, and we've been very engaged and actively involved in understanding as well as TCPA changes as of recently. And we've been invited, and we speak at local and national events and with our national leaders to help educate them on the matters of TCPA and compliance for the betterment of the industry as a whole. And we would just like to invite you, for those that are interested, to visit our website at www.tcn.com. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, McKay, and thanks again to TCN for sponsoring today's webinar. I'm sure I speak for all of us listening today when I say we appreciate your generous support and your commitment to helping educate and inform the credit and collections industry. Thank you. Now, with that, let's pick up our discussion. Roger, let me ask you, a common negotiating strategy is to never be the person to make the first offer. Is that something you recommend when you're training or talking to your collectors?
Are you ready for a very definitive answer?
Yes.
It is yes, no, and other. So yeah, the sales rule of old is the next one who speaks loses. So if you put an amount due out there, as we're all taught from embryonic collectors, the balance of $658 is due. How would you like to take care of that? You're not going to, or if you talk, you're going to potentially lose that conversation. However, with the development of analytics and measurements, I think that the safer statement is it depends. So if you're looking at a data profile of a low-scoring consumer and you've got a $1,500 debt there, I would encourage you to, when you put out a soft request for the payment in full, and providing that it's outside the validation period, that's some that's a whole nother webinar, Mike, on collecting within the validation period. But if you put a soft request out for the payment in full, I would be prepared on that particular consumer to offer some sort of a payment arrangement. And instead of asking how much can you pay a month, you may offer something like, would a 3-month arrangement or a 6-month arrangement be better for you? Humans think in the shortest and smallest amounts in terms possible. So if you say, how much can you pay on this? Someone says $10 or $20 a month. Well, they just offered you a 138-month arrangement to pay a bill. Whereas if you offer them 3 or 6 months, they may come back and say, I certainly can't pay this off in 3 or 6 months, but you might get 9 or 12 months out of them. So you have to get creative when you ask that question. Now, conversely, if you're looking at a high score person with gainful employment, maybe this is one that just slipped between the cracks, and you can identify that person on Maslow's hierarchy of needs as someone who may be on the social, the ego or the self-fulfillment level. Maybe you play to their ego and say, you know, we get these once in a while, and it just looks like this is something that slipped between the cracks. I can take care of this for you real quick on your Visa or MasterCard, whichever's more convenient for you today. So, Mike, I know you asked me a very simple question with a 3-dimensional, deep, complex answer, but that should get the conversation kicked off a little bit.
Well, and I can't agree with you more, especially with the answer, it depends. And I know that that's a common answer that we give that cannot be looked at so fondly sometimes, but it really does truly depend on who you're talking to. And we need to be mindful that we should not be treating each call and each negotiation so specific and so black and white, where we're just sitting in a box and this is what we're going to do on every single call. Each call is unique, and we have to be listening to what is actually going on in order to make that determination as who's going to throw the ball first, if you will, or who's going to throw out, you know, the first offer. And one thing that I really like to talk about is making sure that you're looking at the account history, you know, and paying attention to when you do speak to that patient or consumer and you're making the request for payment, looking at the history to see, have we talked to this person before? And if we did, maybe we talked to them 5 times, and all 5 times they said, look, I can't pay the balance in full, and they don't really budge, and they hang up on the previous collectors. Maybe, you know, we've tried to negotiate settlements or maybe a balance over 2 or 3 months, and that just wasn't something the consumer patient expressed that they were able to do. So now maybe on this call, you've looked at the history, and maybe you are going to jump and make the first offer by saying, look, I've seen we've spoken to you before. It looks like you don't have the ability to pay the full balance at this time. Let me ask you some questions. Let's see what you qualify for. You know, maybe you're going to start negotiating, you know, a down payment and then monthly payments, or a temporary payment plan until the situation changes. But I think that it really does depend on what you're looking at, who you're working with, and what your client's expectations are as well.
I'm gonna piggyback on that, on both of these guys, because they're both spot on, and you're right. And I love how Beth said it. You can't put negotiations in a box. It depends, because you can't say, well, this is my blanket statement, and this is what I'm going to do every time I'm on a call. So I guess it really depends on what people's call flows are. But I mean, I always say we should ask for payment in full right off the bat. But again, like Beth said, if we've talked to them several times and we know their situation isn't going to allow them to pay payment in full, then we need to start with where we left off in the last time. I always say things like, you're the only one that knows your situation. So again, we're putting it back on them, and so they can say, you're right, I am the only one that knows what my situation is. And then follow it up by saying, you may find it would be in your best interest to pay this as soon as possible, whether that be today or this coming Friday. That's completely up to you, because naturally the last thing you want is more, you know, interest or whatever the consequence would be tacked onto this bill, right? So now which one works best for you? So it's really kind of appealing to their stubborn side of things by saying, you know what, you know more than I do about this situation and how you can get this taken care of. I'm just going to throw out some options, and then I'm going to let you pick.
So one thing that Kelly brought up is flexibility. And early on as collectors, we're always taught that flexibility is one of the key critical characteristics of a successful collector. The thing that I always point out is whenever we speak to a consumer, that's the first time, it could be the first time, the last time, and the only time we ever speak to that consumer. I used to always advocate, be that collection sniper, if you will, one shot, one resolution, or payment in full on the first contact. Now, dependent on the situation, it's on the first contact, resolve the debt, because we've got less chance of missing follow-up, getting screened out to where people aren't following up with us, getting dodged, or setting an arrangement that will not fit the consumer's needs. And we all know this. A lot of times, if we push consumers hard enough, they'll agree to an arrangement that they know they cannot keep just to get you off the phone. That's not fair to you, that's not fair to the consumer, and it's not fair to the client. So a great transition that I always use when they throw up an issue or a problem for not being able to pay the balance in full is I say, you know, Mr. Smith, I'm so glad I'm talking to you today. I talk to a lot of people in similar situations every day, and the good news is I'm usually able to help them figure something out. Now, let me go ahead and ask you some questions and update your account to see what kind of options we may have. Would that be okay? And 99 times out of 100, we get some real good agreement, and we're able to update that account and move into negotiation and payment arrangement discussions.
And I think that that's key too, what you just said, Roger, is, you know, let me update some information and let me see what options are available to you. And maybe you are working a client that there's only 2 or 3 options, right? So maybe the only options, maybe you're a frontline collector and your ability is to offer balance in full settlement and then maybe break the balance up into 2 or 3 payments and that's it. But the patient or consumer doesn't know that. They're hearing that you're trying to work with them, and they're hearing that, hey, if they stay on the phone with you and they give you the information that you need, they're going to qualify for something. That alone is going to keep the call going, and they don't know that you only have 2 or 3 options, right? They just know that you're willing to help them, and that goes a long way in that call. Great point.
And I agree. You have to be willing to help them. And that's when it goes back to what we've already talked about a little bit is collecting to the individual consumer and listening to everything that they're saying and basing a solution based on that individual and not acting as if you're willing to help them, but actually being willing to help them. And when you look back at the old comments and the past comments and they've been unable or unwilling to pay up until now, goes back to this is your chance to change them into payers versus non-payers, is your ability to really listen and collect in a way that they're going to best want to pay you. So it's, again, then don't manipulate by sounding like you want to solve their problem, but instead really thinking about this consumer and saying, I'm going to find a solution that's going to best work for them.
So based on the answers to the last question, I guess I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyways. There's another common negotiating tactic that says never to accept what the other side offers without asking for more. I was going to ask, is that what you recommend? And I'm going to guess all 3 of you are probably going to say it depends, but I'll let you say it. Kelly, maybe you can go first this time.
Of course, I'm going to say it depends, yes. I would hate to disappoint, but you know, every collector has every good collector, every successful collector has a call flow, you know, offer this, then that, and then start negotiating, right? You know, they start with payment in full, then they go with payment over, you know, the next 2 months and then the settlement. However they do it, there's definitely a flow that they follow. And then after they get no's, then they start negotiating. So I guess I would recommend this if it is what your call flow is and it's what's working for you and it works for those individual consumers. What I want to add to that is that make sure you're giving receipts along the way. And when I mean receipts, meaning they're gonna say no or yes to your your flow in each step of the flow. If they say no, then you need to